Hi, my name's Nikki. This is the interventionalist. And today I want to talk about vulnerability versus intimacy and the way that vulnerability doesn't immediately equate to intimacy or emotional intimacy, even though I think vulnerability is required to develop intimacy. I don't think it's inherently a side effect of it, but I think sometimes we can mistake vulnerability as something that is inherently intimate. And I think you can build a false sense of intimacy in specifically in relationships, and I do think that can lead to like maybe overcommitment, like too fast before you really get to know someone. And the reason that I'm thinking about this is because I've just actually been recently having a lot of conversations about it and experiencing just like some, I don't know, some experiences that I'm having currently have really put into perspective for me the difference between the development of real emotional connection versus attachment, and just attachment as a result of vulnerability, but a lack of true emotional connection, because I think I'm starting to really understand what emotional connection looks like. And I'm particularly thinking about romantic relationships because I've experienced that vulnerability that led to intimacy and that development of emotional connection over, I think, like a pretty healthy, consistent period of time versus in friendships particularly versus like this massive wave of apparent intimacy with somebody over the course of like a week because you sort of just dumped everything about your life in front of them and they now hold it, whether or not they really understand it or they've really responded to you about it. They were in the room with you, and sometimes I think that can feel like emotional connection, but I don't know if it really is. And I don't know if it allows you to really gauge your compatibility or the way that they might really understand you. If they're just in the room but they don't ever really respond, but you two are just in the room together. I think it's more than just being in the same room and dumping kind of the things that have happened to you. I think it comes from communication, and I do think that takes time, consistent communication over time. I don't think that you can sort of replace the necessity of time when it comes to developing a true sense of intimacy and emotional connection, even though I think we can kind of develop a false sense of it. And I'm a lesbian, so I like my relationships, particularly romantic, have always been through that lens. And there's so much that I think impacts lesbian relationships, and there's reasons why we have like a U-Haul stereotype. And I have a video talking about the history of it. Like it's not a totally untrue stereotype. I think that it's misunderstood, and I think there's a greater conversation about it or like around it to be had. But because of that, like I have experienced that, which really what all that means is that you've like rushed into a relationship really fast. And I have experienced that in the past. Like technically both my relationships, the first one and the second one, which was a healthier relationship, it was still really fast, arguably U-Hauled. And I can see now the way that it lacked intimacy, even though I thought we had it. And okay, now I'm thinking about this. So I moved, and this is a new background because I just moved. And I don't know how I feel about it yet. So it might change over time. I know some stuff will change for sure, like this table. But those are pictures in the back, and every single one is crooked. Like every single picture is crooked, and I just can't fix it because they're like they're nailed to the wall. I don't know what I was thinking. I don't know if my like vision is lopsided or something, or I literally can't see straight. But they're all, I guess now it's just gonna be part of the theme because I would have to get them off the wall somehow. Anyways, if that's distracting, and I swear I'll iron that flag. That's another thing that like people talk about in my comments. But anyways, that's beside the point. I just wanted to talk about this because I'm experiencing sort of in real time the contrast to what I have experienced, which is like rushed relationships and what I now realize to be like a false sense of intimacy. Something that I think I knew in theory and intellectually, but I think it's been really different to feel it. And I guess I kind of want to talk about the way that vulnerability can exist without intimacy and why I'm not sure that that'll ever be enough, even though I do think it's important that people do witness you and you do bare yourself to somebody that way in order to develop intimacy. But I think vulnerability without intimacy or connection is really just disclosure. And disclosure without understanding is just disclosure without connection. And I think relationships, friendships, romantic relationships, family relationships, the goal is, and what makes them meaningful and sustainable is connection beyond just hearing what someone has to say. It's like processing it, internalizing it, and being able to tell them that you understand it, and you do understand them. It's important that you do understand the person talking to you, as well as like they feel understood by you, to develop that kind of connection. And I think the interesting thing is, like, I guess where the false intimacy can lie, that this is just my experience that I'm just noticing, that I kind of want to talk about, is like, I think if you've gone through pretty traumatic things, or really just anything vulnerable in general, but I feel like when we talk about vulnerability, it tends to be the things that hurt to talk about. They're really impactful usually to repeat to anybody, and to like open yourself up to even offering someone the opportunity to like see you that way, receive that information, react to you potentially. And when you do that, I think naturally you're going to be hit with a lot of emotions, just because you're sharing something that was once or is really emotional for you, in addition to the emotions that arise when you take the risk of vulnerability, which often does, I think, cause a bit of like its own kind of emotional like turmoil, maybe not always in a negative way, inside of you though, because it's like, this is a risk, right? And I think the more, secure you feel in your relationship to yourself, the less scary it is to be vulnerable, and maybe the less it impacts you to be vulnerable, the less emotionally overwhelming it is just to let someone hear these things about you, because if you like feel quite secure, like you'll be okay. Like if the response isn't, I guess, theoretically good, or things go badly and they've gotten to know you this way. But if you struggle with like not having yet felt that secure in yourself, or with your self-worth, or these things that can make you especially sensitive to like somebody's response, that's another kind of emotional overwhelm. And I've been that way. Like I have been very sensitive to the response and reaction to sharing that information with somebody in a way that I'm not anymore, just because I've changed. I do feel more secure. So when I am vulnerable with people, like I don't feel like I'm going to throw up after, and not in the same way. And before in my life, like my last relationship, because she saw me really vulnerable. She was someone I opened up to about my abusive relationship, because the trauma of that, no matter all like the therapy and the work I did between that relationship and getting in another, like it still came through, and I still had to go through like the relational triggers that can only exist in relationships and the relational healing. So in order for her to understand me, or for me to even be able to be in that relationship, I had to be honest, and so I had to be vulnerable. And I wanted to be in that relationship, so I chose to try to be vulnerable and to be vulnerable. And that in and of itself was really emotionally overwhelming to me, because it was the first time in a romantic relationship way that I had been that open with somebody. And I still don't think that I had like a really secure sense of like self-worth. And I obviously like experienced like a lot of trauma before. So opening up to someone like only felt so safe. Like I kind of intellectually had gotten to a point where I could see why it was good, it was important to like kind of mentally vetting somebody before doing it, I guess. And that didn't change that it was the first time I was doing it. So it still like hit me pretty intensely. And so when I did open up to her, for example, that action alone made me really emotionally overwhelmed, let alone like the emotional overwhelm that comes with like repeating or recounting something that happened to you that was like, like, oh my God, that's a lot already. So it was like a double whammy. And I was just overwhelmed altogether. And I shared things with her, and she was in the room and she listened. And that's really it. And I don't mean that in a negative way. Like, she listened, she looked at me, she stayed in the room with me, she stayed calm. And I feel incredibly grateful for that experience and for her in those moments. And it changed me still. It was really restorative to experience that. But she never really responded, really, if ever, to be completely honest. When I look back in the times that I did sort of disclose the things I experienced in my life, the things that had really shaped me, or the things that like I felt like somebody needed to know to like be able to make sense of me as a person, she didn't really respond to them. She just didn't. Maybe it's just like not her style, but she was just always quiet. And that was like enough at the time, like just to have somebody who was kind and would listen and wouldn't leave because of the fact that you've experienced bad things. And when you've experienced bad things, sometimes you think like the second you tell anyone, they're going to think you're a burden or like bad or just like a sad, depressing person, and just like be like, I can't be around you. Feel guilty sometimes for opening up, and that can cause a lot of anxiety. And so I was like, just the fact she stayed in the room was really like enough, and I was really thankful for it, and it was like reparative for me in a lot of ways. But I guess I never really felt understood by her because she didn't respond. And so when I did share these things, we didn't connect over them. Like they just now existed between us. And like she knew about it and I knew about it. And we both knew that we knew something about me, but we didn't talk about it. And I don't mean like talk about it in depth like therapy, but just like respond in a way that, I don't know, from my perspective, told me that you heard what I've said. You've made sense of it in a way that like you see me and I know that you see me. And we know that there's an accurate understanding occurring, because if not, she could have just been taking all that information. Like this person can take all this information, hold it inside of them, and now because maybe they misunderstood it because they didn't like ask questions, or they didn't sort of even rephrase it to try and show you that they understand or they're making sense of it, and then let you maybe expand to help them make sense of it more, or maybe correct where they're misunderstanding. I had no idea whether or not she could have, anyone like in this case who doesn't respond back could have like developed an entire misrepresentation or mischaracterization of me or the person telling the really vulnerable information, or just like didn't understand what they were hearing, and so they didn't want to like respond. Maybe they felt like a lot of pressure, or maybe they needed more time to like think of a response, but I'm like assuming they kind of never respond to the things you're sharing, and they don't understand, and that's why they don't want to respond. But that's kind of like difficult. They never understand at all. They're not even trying to empathize. Just like, I don't understand, so I'm not going to respond. I think the response is where connection lies. And I think staying in the room and responding is really where emotional intimacy lies. And I also think that it can be easy to sort of compensate for a lack of emotional intimacy, or replace and like think it's developing through physical intimacy. But it's not the same thing. Like that is a form of intimacy, but that is not inherently emotional intimacy. And I do think when I look back on that relationship, that not even just in a sexual way, I think part of the reason that I could sort of like not get hung up on the way that I felt like she just heard me but didn't respond. So sometimes that made me anxious because I'm like, I don't know what she's thinking. Like, what are you thinking about this? Like, I don't, was that there was physical comfort after. So like we would hug, or she would stay with me like in that room, or things like sex, but there was physical comfort, and like there was a physical intimacy that like we fell back on, and that in its own way, it is intimacy. And so it was comforting. And I do think that there's a language in and of itself that is physical. Like there's a physical language you can share with somebody, but it wasn't enough to, I think, make us, or to develop a connection between us long term that would sustain beyond physical or sexual intimacy, and be able to withstand, or the relationship was able to like withstand the loss of those things. And I don't mean that as in like sexual or physical intimacy isn't something that you can need in a relationship. Like it could be something, I think that's totally fine. But I do think it's important to remember that physical and sexual intimacy, like they do rely on your external body, and your external body is ever changing. Like that is undeniable, and that will happen, even if it's not anything dramatic or profound in change in your younger years, and maybe when you get older, and then maybe it's not until you like get quite older, when you start to age, that you experience changes in your body. But that is an inevitable thing. And so the way that you can engage in anything physical with another person can be impacted and will be impacted. And you might never anticipate that it'll impact you, or maybe your partner. Maybe it would impact it long term, and then you realize, okay, well, this won't work because that is a really important part of the relationship. Or it's for a short amount of time, a medium amount of time, and it's like, can our relationship withstand not having that intimacy, because we still have an intimacy that allows us to feel connected and understood and fulfilled in some way. Even though like I still think you can like still need for total relationship fulfillment these other things. But the point is, that doesn't mean that you always have access to them with somebody for maybe a short or long term or long amount of time. And I just think it's important then, because even if it's long distance, even if you're like away for a week, that this is still a person that you can still find fulfillment from, and like understanding and connection, and know that you could go to them if you needed to be witnessed, and also mirrored and reflected. And I think that's healthy in like relationships, like being able to emotionally mirror each other, not just one person doing it to the other where it's one-sided, but emotionally mirror each other. Again, I think that's where a lot of connection lies. And it's when somebody can reflect yourself back at you. And that is through response. Like they are taking what you've said and through their own words, reflecting it back at you. And physical intimacy just is not going to by itself offer that. And it's not inherently immutable, so like unchanging. Your physical body will change, but often, this is going to be a dramatic way to word this, but like it's your soul, for all that we kind of like, I don't know, informally associate that with, your values, your beliefs, the things that you think, the things that you feel, like all of these things that are intangible about you, those things are unchanging, and those will remain if the things outside of your control sometimes or your external body changes. And you will likely always be able to offer that to somebody, even if that internal world does change as you grow and you age or you change. It's still your internal world that you'll be able to offer somebody. And even if the way that you can offer or somebody else can offer their sort of physical body in physically intimate ways, you can still offer that. And that intimacy, I think, is what can allow a relationship to sustain and also be fulfilling to a degree that it just can't if you don't have a deep emotional, vulnerable, and intimate connection. And I think a lot of intimacy is that emotional mirroring. It is that seeing of somebody's like unchanging, intangible, internal self and being able to reflect it back at them because you understand, and then they reflect you back at yourself. And then like you can sort of like expand the other person and you understand more because you learn through trying to and like through understanding them. And so you grow, and you grow that like internal world that you will always have in some way or another, versus like what could be changed at any point in time, whether it's just distance or actually physically changed, like your physical body. But also like, I think intimacy, like that real depth of intimacy where you can feel understood by someone, like truly understood, that allows a relationship to sustain to that depth or connect to that way, that makes you feel understood to that degree, requires communication. And I do think physical, like I said, physical intimacy is a form of communication, but it's still not spoken. Like at least in my experience, hugging after like being really vulnerable didn't tell me that she understood what I said, like my ex. It didn't tell me that she could make sense of what I said in a way that was accurate, you know? It didn't tell me anything other than she was staying in the room with me, which mattered, but long term wouldn't be enough to feel connection, and wouldn't be enough to sustain connection if we couldn't hug after sharing those things. If we could only talk on the phone, it wouldn't be enough, you know? And I think I'm just realizing that. Like I'm just realizing the lack of intimacy that I had in that relationship, and the sense, like the false sense of intimacy that I had developed in that relationship that I think I was settling for, because I don't think I had necessarily in a romantic way, because I've experienced that platonically, but in a romantic way. So I didn't know that it could be different, I guess. And because there was the addition of physical and sexual intimacy in my relationships, and in that relationship, there was that option as a way to compensate for the lack of true emotional intimacy as a result of vulnerability. And I think that really skewed my perception of the intimacy and the potential for intimacy in the relationship. And then I kind of just settled for the fact that like, yeah, we could touch and she'd stay in the room with me, even if like she never really understands the things that I'm talking about. That's okay, because like she doesn't really need to, as long as she's there. But it's not that that's not also like a really wonderful thing, but I just don't think it's enough. I guess it could be, right? Like, I don't know. This is just my experience. Like, and I've talked about it with a few people recently, but it, in my case, just wasn't. And I do think that led to I do think that I was emotionally unfulfilled in that relationship, and it started to build. My last video kind of talks about this, and I didn't realize it because I do think I didn't really think, I thought I was like settling, and I thought it wasn't like really realistic or fair to kind of expect all that other kind of intimacy, like emotional intimacy, in addition to like physical intimacy. But by the end of that relationship, like I was frustrated with the lack of talking, I guess, like the response, the lack of when we did talk, there being like real understanding. Like I was getting frustrated. I feel like she didn't understand me. Sometimes I feel like she would treat me in this way that I'm like, you really don't you're really misunderstanding who I am. And I was getting frustrated and I was like unfulfilled, and it wasn't until it ended that I could put words to that, why I felt that specific way. At the time, I was like, I thought it must have been any other thing apparently in my life that was going wrong but that relationship, because I thought kind of just having that intimacy and that option for like vulnerable disclosure should be like ultimate intimacy in that relationship. And we got along and we were happy and we laughed together. So I was like, that's enough. That is enough. This is like kind of perfect, the perfect relationship. And it wasn't bad, but it wasn't enough. And this doesn't excuse what she did. She cheated on me with her ex-boyfriend. But I do have to think about the way that obviously that was a budding feeling for me. And she cheated on me emotionally and physically. And I'm gonna guess that was a result of insecurity, but also unfulfillment. And I can understand that now because I can look back and see where I was as well. And we were probably in our own ways unfulfilled together, but I don't think it meant that we were unhappy necessarily with each other. We didn't like each other. It just meant that we couldn't offer the specific kind of response or connection that would be necessary to really have true intimacy and not just like shared vulnerability. I'll never know exactly why. Like I'm kind of speaking for her, but like that's something that I think to probably likely in some way or another be part of the reason that she cheated. And I think the relationship would have ended anyways. Even when I look back now, I start to think, I don't even think it would have lasted that much longer. So I don't know. But I just think something else that I'm realizing is the way that I think we can mistake those like vulnerable disclosures of big pieces of who we are or experiences can make us think that somebody inherently knows us now or understands us. They see us. But again, if they don't really respond to and show you that they really do, it's going to be hard to believe that they really do in some way or another. Or you'll never really know if they do. But either way, like I think sometimes we can think that means that they understand us because we just shared this like massive piece of information about ourselves that felt really big and life defining. So it's like, yeah, okay, now they know me. They know me because I share this thing about me. But I do think that also creates like a false sense of intimacy or even like relationship reality or perception reality, because when you share, I think, really big things that have happened to you, good or bad, you're sharing something that's happened to you, but it doesn't define you. Like you've now existed in the aftermath of this thing, likely, thank God, right? Like if it was something bad. And so that is who you are and who you're becoming. You are not that experience. Like who you are is existing now and in the aftermath and is in your daily life as you become something outside of this. That is not who you are. Like it helps provide context to the way that you live your life now. That is like a culmination of who you are, but it isn't who you are. And so I do think it can feel like they know me, but no, they just know something about what happened to you. But in order to know someone and to know you, they need to live alongside you for a while to see how you live, how you exist in the aftermath. And then they can take this context and understand you in the way that you do live and understand more about you and understand what might have shaped you. But it isn't the way that you're living every single day. It's not the thing that you're living through every day. Like that is not who you are. It's something that contributed to the development of who you are and who you're becoming, but it's not who you are. And I think sometimes it can feel like now they know me, they know who I am because they know this big thing about me, but no, they can still misunderstand you and not know you as a person. And I think you can have those big moments where you share this like big information and then think, okay, you've connected. Connection has been developed, but no, they could just know some information about you, you know? Like that's it. But it was such a big piece of information that you now think of a really deep connection because you shared a big piece of information, and that must mean deeper connection. Whether or not it was like earned, I guess, through time together that you like actually knew this person and you knew that they like were trustable and like they would understand or they do respond to you in a way that makes you feel good and like all this stuff. It might have not even really been earned in the relationship to be sharing such mass amounts of information. But sharing like big things like that can feel so big that the relationship can suddenly feel so big and like there's so much depth because now suddenly they know something so big about you. But that doesn't mean that you're compatible, and it doesn't mean that they understand, and it doesn't actually even mean that you have an intimate relationship. It just means that you've said things to each other about what has happened to you, but it doesn't mean that you know each other unless you've actually gotten to live in some way or another alongside this person enough to witness them truly, not just hear about them, but witness them, and witness them now, not just hear about then. And that takes time. And that's why you can't replace the necessity of time when it comes to developing emotional depth and depth of intimacy. You can't speed run that. Even though sometimes it can feel like it, like you can skip a bunch of steps and develop like this insane, incomparable depth of emotional intimacy and connection because you just like word vomited the biggest thing about you that like in your past really defined you or really hurt, for example. And that still doesn't actually create connection. It just creates, I don't even know if it creates, it just offers the opportunity to, I guess, further create like understanding, but it doesn't in and of itself, sharing that, create a connection or a depth of connection. And I think even then, it doesn't erase the necessity for consistency, because how someone reacts in one moment, maybe in that one big moment, you're without time to see if that's who they are consistently. That could have been a one-off outlier in the way that they reacted. You know, like people who are quite narcissistic can react really good to the things you say and like be there for you in the first few weeks, the first month, even the first year, and then not, which is really scary to think about, right? Because that's like deceitful and that's scary to think about. But the point is, like, you would need to know them long enough to see that the way that they act in those moments that makes you feel connected to them or really makes you feel like, wow, like I like you, that is who they are consistently, that is how they live their life. It's not just a one-off moment for them. But if you don't have enough moments to collect, you haven't collected enough moments about them to really, I guess, sort of solidify that perception of them, you just have no guarantee that that's really who you are. You just have one moment. And none of us are defined by our reactions in one moment, good or bad of a reaction, patient or impatient. One single moment will not define that. Like, it is how we continue to live our lives every single day, the culmination of moments that really begin to define who we are, beyond one specific one. So I don't know. That's just also something else I'm thinking about. I'm just kind of thinking about this. It's just been on my mind, honestly, because I've just been having some experiences recently that have just realistically really put into perspective for me what emotional intimacy can really look like and feel like when it's being developed in a way that isn't loud and overwhelming, and it's being developed in a way that makes you feel seen and not just necessarily listened to. Like someone sitting in the room with you technically listening, like my ex, but seen because someone responded and spoke back. So it's really putting into perspective for me. And I also think, like, talking about how things can be really sort of abrupt and big because you share maybe a big piece of information and the other person does too, and you have this vulnerability and now you speed ran connection. Maybe you did respond to each other and so there was an intimacy there, but you like speed ran past all like the smaller moments to even like really earn that big moment. I think really healthy intimacy, I guess, with somebody, the development of like emotional intimacy, I think it comes a lot quieter, and I think it's because it comes a lot more consistently, and the relationship changes and earns that intimacy over time because you consistently grow and respond and witness the other person in both small moments leading up to bigger moments. And then you really can understand the bigger moments because you have sort of background on this person already through understanding their smaller moments and understanding and getting to see how they live now in these moments. You sort of earn that intimacy. So when you tell them a bigger thing, it doesn't feel huge and abrupt because it was built towards. And so it naturally falls in line with, I guess, the trajectory of getting to know somebody. So it doesn't feel so massive. Even if it still feels big, like, it doesn't feel like this is the one huge defining moment, like this is going to be a huge deal. And if this goes well, when I tell them this, they really understand me as a person and now we're connected. I think it's like you already have a connection. And so it's a lot quieter when you do share those things, and sort of the best way, maybe even a little bit underwhelming, maybe sort of seismically underwhelming, largely underwhelming, because it doesn't feel so scary to confide in them because you've slowly over time with each other confided and responded to the other. So when you do share something so big, you're not so worried or afraid of the reaction. You can kind of predict what it's going to be. I think that also contributes to the sort of comfort necessary to not be anxious when confiding in somebody or sharing something with them, especially if you have like an anxious attachment style maybe, but even secure, like if you're sharing deep things about yourself. I think that the relationship grows and changes a lot quieter because it's not so chaotic and loud, and it's not abrupt in the way that you connect. It just exists and it just continues and it just grows. It's kind of like, when you have like a pet, I don't know, I'm thinking about like if you like the dogs that I had growing up, like, or even my cat, like I got him when he was tiny. He was a kitten. He was like as young as you could be when you get a kitten. He was really small. He was like this big. And I swear he looks the same to me. Like, he looks like the same size. Everyone who has met this cat knows and has heard me say, isn't he so small? Doesn't he look like a kitten? And I mean it. I'm so for real. And I don't like register in my brain that he looks different until I look at old pictures of him. And then I'm like, wow, he's aged. Like, this has changed. But I just see him, right? Like, it just is, he's just the same cat. He's just a kitten to me. It's not this abrupt, massive change that I can like mark in my mind necessarily, where it was like he was small and now he's big. There was no growth in between, not really. I think it's kind of like that with a development of sort of like healthy emotional intimacy, or like a relationship is, it started small in a way that it should, and then it grew. So by the time you share really big things, it's not so big and abrupt because you've already had a relationship to look back on where you knew this person. So that change in that moment, where there is going to be a change because they are learning maybe something big about you, doesn't feel so big in and of itself to share it. And I think that's important. I don't think it should be, at that point, so scary to be that vulnerable with somebody. I think it should be earned. I think that reduces also your anxiety in a way that you probably deserve to not feel so anxious sharing, things about yourself that might be, and always will be, a little bit hard to share. I don't know. I think that feeling an abrupt change with a relationship where you went from really like quite 0 to 100, I think if a relationship continues to work out after that, and I said this before, I think it's kind of like the exception to the rule of the necessity of time and like living alongside someone for a while. And I think, I don't know if I'm not saying it can't exist. Like, I think you kind of just get lucky if that compatibility then exists in the aftermath of that, like hitting 100 and keep going. I kind of just think that's luck, because I don't think you can compensate for the lack of necessity of time. But I think it can happen. I also think, that despite the fact that, yeah, that has happened, people have said that they met someone in 3 days they knew, and then they got married in a week and they've been together 50 years. I think it's maybe a little bit safer emotionally if you have relational trauma to not indulge in that exception of a relationship perspective, at least for me, because I do have relationship trauma. I do have that lesbian U-Haul history, unfortunately. And so like, it's not helpful for me to even consider that as something that could like is a reality. And it's not something I think is true anymore. I just don't. I guess maybe that makes me seem like not a hopeless romantic. I don't know. But like, I just don't. I think that's because of my experiences, but I also feel more secure in approaching any kind of relationship because of that. I think I feel a lot more grounded in getting to know somebody, because I feel comfortable with and feel sort of validated in requiring time to build a relationship and not willing to like rush it, I guess. So yeah, I don't know. I'm just kind of, I don't know. I guess that's it. I'm just thinking about that. I don't know. I don't know. I've just been experiencing like a lot of change, I guess, when it comes to, I don't know. I think I am being in some ways in my life being changed quietly, when it comes to my understanding of this like intimacy that I've talked about. And I don't even know if I realized, because it did feel like so kind of quiet in ways that it wasn't until I like really sat and reflected that I could go back and see like even the change in my, if I want to make it like a physical symbol, like my face over that course of time. I wouldn't have noticed it like looking in the mirror. I just kept seeing the same person, the way that my like cat, I just kept seeing a kitten, but there was a change. And I guess it's like looking back at an old picture, but it was just like reflecting on old moments, like my last relationship in the beginning of it, things like that. But it took having to like sit and think about it, because it wasn't so abrupt that I had to actually go back and think, because it wasn't like so seismic. Yeah, I don't know. It's been interesting. It's been really eye-opening. And yeah, I guess that's it. I don't know if I have anything else to say other than I think it's a really nice experience to like sort of get to experience in real time uh, a development of like, I would say like non-rushed, non, I guess, impacted by like immense pressure for quick movement or like immediate intimacy. It's been nice to experience the development of a connection like that. It's been, I think, really eye-opening for me and also healing. But yeah, I guess that's it. So okay, well, I've been kind of rambling. I think I'll end it here. And I can see on the camera right now how crooked these photos are. That's crazy. I don't understand how I did that. Anyways, I would love to hear your experiences. If like you're watching this and you relate maybe, or you have any thoughts or maybe disagree, or like anything you think of when you hear this, like your own experiences or just like thoughts you have in general, I would love to hear them. I think it's really interesting to compare and contrast like our relationship experiences, because I think we learn a lot about our own selves through reflecting our experiences back at each other. You know, that opportunity to relate to somebody else, I think, offers you an opportunity to reflect on your experiences in a way that's really helpful. And so maybe selfishly so, I would love to hear your experiences if you have any to share. I'd also like to hear them in general, or any thoughts. And if there's anything you would like to share and you maybe don't feel comfortable sharing it here, you can always send it to me directly. I have an email down below. I also have a submissions page if you want something like published on the website, something written. And yeah, I would love to hear it. I would be honored to hear your thoughts or your experiences. And I always moderate the comments really well, so nobody can be like mean or stupid in the comments. You don't have to worry about that. There won't be anyone like homophobic or transphobic or awful. And yeah, I think that's it. And I guess I also just want to say that you're always deserving and always will be deserving of a, I think, in the best way possible, quiet, and in the best way possible, underwhelming, consistent, kind care and love and relationships. The ones that make you feel grounded and not abruptly even changed or overwhelmed. The ones that kind of sneak up on you, I guess. And so you can experience that change in a way that feels good and not I'm going to have a breakdown, it's kind of scary. Maybe at least you can microdose the fear that comes with like experiencing that kind of intimacy for the first time, because it's still, if you haven't before, always going to probably bring up some feelings, but hopefully they won't be so overwhelming because it won't be so abrupt. And I think you're just really deserving of those peaceful relationships, and you always will be deserving of those peaceful relationships, and to have somebody respond to you in a way that's peaceful and actually connective. And if you want that, I know that you'll find it and it will find you. So I really believe that. Actually, 100% totally believe that. So, okay. I think that's it. I'll end it here. This video is too long. Well, thank you for watching, for listening to me kind of ramble about this and my own experiences and things that I'm learning, and whether they're helpful or not, or even if maybe you disagree completely. I don't know. Thank you for listening. I really appreciate it. And okay, I think that's it. Thank you for watching. I look forward to hearing your experiences and thoughts, and I hope you have a good rest of your day, and I will see you in the next video. Okay.